Hello. So this is going to be a demonstration on how we can think about how film connects to qualitative methods. So I'm going to be going through a couple of film um, sort of samples that I've gotten, and I'm no film expert. There's a whole another space in which academics analyze film and talk about film. And I took one film studies class in college, so I'm not an expert, but I think it's helpful to think about film and how film is produced, to also think about qualitative methods, in particular when you think about reflexivity and positionality. So oftentimes the camera in documentaries, which is most of the excerpts we're going to be looking at, are documentaries, and then I'm also going to be talking about The Office. We'll start off by watching like commentary on The Office, which is a sitcom that was aired in like the 2005 or so, and is a mockumentary. So, in thinking about film and the cameraman and their positionality in the space, we can also think about us as researchers and our positionality in the space and how we influence our research subjects, especially primarily this will focus on participant observations, which we talked about in um, like field research. This is primarily going to be focused on field research and how we can think about film and the positionality of the camera to also reflect on our own positionality as researchers in different spaces as well. And I'll also post a focus group qualitative um, interview that I found on YouTube that I think is helpful for if you're doing focus groups, how that is different. Um, but yeah, I'm primarily going to be focusing on field research and how you can think about that in these different clips. And just a review, so reflexivity is a little different than positionality. So reflexivity is the researcher's awareness of their perspective, including their own personal biases when they're looking at the content or the field research or field setting that they're going into. And sort of acknowledging the power dynamics of you as a researcher given your particular setup and where you are along a sort of spectrum of if you're detached or embedded, and I'll go over the spectrum in a second as well. And so positionality, on the other hand, is how we also think about how people perceive us when we're in the field and how that influences the data that we're getting because people do react to us as people within it. And I think I'm going to show, but all of these clips that I'm pulling from are from historical archives. So I'll have a list of historical archives if you guys are interested. I think it's fascinating to watch older film, and I think like as much as we focus on media in our present age and like are constantly surrounded by media, we don't see a lot of historical media. And like during the 70s and 80s, there was like a huge rise in documentary filmmaking because handheld cameras were more of a thing that was accessible, and that wasn't the case prior. And so I think it's really interesting to look at these older videos because it sort of is like a time capsule, and you can sort of see what life was like outside of the current state we're in, and the questions that continue and themes that emerge, and that we like the differences and similarities. But besides that, so we're focusing on field research in particular. So this is like direct observation, asking questions, so going out into the field, into the world, in very specific context, a place. So I'll have videos on Maxwell Street, which is a particular place in Chicago, and a lot of these videos focus on Chicago because I took a Chicago film class. I'm from Chicago, so excuse me if you can think of better examples of the more New Jersey examples of film presented feel free to post it on the discussion board. I am more than happy to see more examples of how we can connect film and qualitative methods. And just to clarify, like film studies is a form of qualitative methods. It's getting out into the field, it's engaging with people, especially like documentary film. It is very much a form of qualitative methods. And we don't cover it too much in our class, but that is a way that a lot of criminal justice research gets promoted. And I mean, there's a lot of like the 13th is a documentary film that a lot of people get motivated around criminal justice issues for. So there are a lot of relevant documentaries that you can search on the archival websites that I'm going to provide in the links with this video to continue your learning. And so what we're going to focus on in particular is the role of the observer. So if there are people who are interviewing people, and then also we're thinking about the role of the camera person, who is the observer in these particular instances, because we're talking about documentaries, right? And so we're going to think about whether or not the observer is like a complete participant, if they're participating in the space. And I think when we're thinking about film, it's a little bit different because there's, regardless of whether or not the person is participating in the space or commenting on the space, they're physically present in there. So like the act of having the film camera and crew like inherently changes how people act, and it's very obvious, versus the act of having a researcher, whether or not they're disclosed to be researching or not, is a little bit different. So there's a little bit more anonymity to being a researcher because you're not carrying a film crew and camera along with you, but you are observing people, and people do, like you'll see in the films, they do change when they feel like they're being observed, particularly by cameras. And that might change a little bit, like as we become more acclimated towards cameras and being videotaped across time, but it definitely is something that changes for us. Like we inherently feel different or want to act differently when someone's watching us and there's an audience that's going to see us in the future. So I think that's really important. And although it's different as a researcher to be in that space and be observing people, I think seeing how people react to cameras also can help you think about sort of the issues with observing people in the field and how you can get around those and how to analyze the data that you're getting in a way that recognizes that interaction and that positionality, right? And so there's complete participant on one side, and then there's complete observer on the other side. And so complete observer, remember, would be like if you were saw a bunch of children playing and like were a psychologist and looking at them behind a glass window that they didn't know you were observing. And then complete participant is if you are actively a part of a particular group or organization and you're sort of writing about it. So we're going to see these from a film perspective too and sort of talk about those and explain some of them looking behind me because I have some notes written behind me. But yes, so let's get started. I don't know how, I might just post this online because I don't want to get in trouble for posting things that are not owned by me, right? Okay. So I think first we will start with a more modern version of how we can think about documentaries, which is The Office, which is a TV show, like I said. And so let me start. I'm not going to play the full video. Let me start here. Okay, sorry about this.
The Office maximizes visual comedy by using camera moves that match a character's emotional state, so handheld can feel out of control. A pan can feel disconnected. And a zoom is just funny, whether it's anger,
I'm your boss.
discovery, or making a mistake.
He is in love with a girl he works with who's engaged, so just cut me some slack, please.
Pam?
Other shows are labeled as mockumentaries simply because the filmmaking evokes a documentary. The camera shakes, the camera zooms, and the editing breaks the rules of screen direction.
Get on the phone. Tell that you're jumping before you're pushed, although we were going...
But I'm referring to a subgenre that is pretending to be a documentary. The production interacts with the fiction, which means the camera has a relationship with the characters.
He's always looking at the camera like this. What is that?
By looking into the lens, Jim is connecting to the audience. It's a gesture that communicates awareness, either positive or negative. Normally, addressing a camera is subjective.
Why what?
His neck.
Like we're listening to someone's thoughts or watching their perception of events. But because of the mockumentary, looking at the camera is the most objective thing a character can do. The Office is partially about the victims of irritation, so the mindful characters are aware of their surroundings, while the oblivious characters are preoccupied by themselves.
Hey, look! I'm king of the world! Woo!
This is reinforced.
Check the security tapes.
The camera is an omniscient perspective. We're given access to all the footage we need to understand the story.
And Andy, where is he? Where the hell is Andy?
Embarrassing moments, betrayal,
I can't talk here.
affairs.
Wait a second. What was that? I didn't know they were filming then.
Looks like the cameraman was hiding behind the shelves.
Wait, so they were filming all the time even when we didn't know it? Oh my god.
Nothing is off limits except for maybe filming in the bathroom. But even then, there are creative ways around this.
Stanley, you don't need to answer me now.
No. Nothing is private because they're all wearing mic packs and we can hear them wherever they go.
Well, yeah, but what if we turn off our mic packs?
They've got parabolic mics. They can pick you up 100 yards away. So, no, if you were around there, they got you.
I think some of the funniest jokes are when characters try to get privacy, but can't.
Do you think they can hear us?
Not if we turn these dials all the way down. Now they can't hear us at all.
Oh, good.
We're totally alone.
Jan famously hates the cameras because she's ashamed to be with Michael.
Am I on camera?
Nope. Totally private. And say whatever is in your heart. You can take a 5 if you want.
Cinema has always been about intimacy, watching strangers in their closest moments. But how often are they influenced by you? Since the cameras are always around, the characters can't really say how they feel. They have to put up an artifice. So the intimate moments are shot remotely. The cameras have incredibly long lenses, so as far as the characters are concerned, they're alone.
Listen, Jim.
Cinematography will always have personality. Framing, movement, it's all there to sell an emotional experience. But for a camera to be an actual character, that's something different.
Wow! What time we got? You know what? That's a good place to end it. Right there.
Okay, so that was by a YouTuber, Jesse Tribble. I don't know about the rest of his work. But I think it presents a couple of themes that we definitely saw within our qualitative methods lecture. So like in research, / in this mockumentary universe of The Office, the camera person is influencing whether or not people are speaking about particular things because they're being filmed and they don't know who the audience is. So there is a level of censure and censoring their own acts and what they're allowed to say, right? And I think that in that scene where the characters in The Office realize that they've been filmed in spaces that they didn't necessarily consent to, like that's a huge ethical concern too. As researchers, we need to make sure that when we're researching particular spaces, that we are ensuring that there's an ethical component of consensual observation and that people are aware that we're doing research. And that is all like dependent on the IRB and sort of the costs and benefits of doing your research. So sometimes you might be more anonymous while you're doing your research, like the example I provided, Cook County. The ethnographer was a participant as observer. She was in courtrooms and she was also working as a prosecutor and as in the public defender and prosecutor's office. So she was a participant as observer, so she presents a level of anonymity to her observers that doesn't create that sort of distrust and distasteful feeling that the people in the office get, and knowing that like their very intimate personal details are being filmed and they were not aware, right? But I think that there's also a level of people change when they're being observed, and like a lot of the jokes and like wild personalities that people present like could be inherently who they are. It could be a show that they're putting on for the camera because they like attention. So that also needs to be like, obviously these are all extremes because it's a like not realistic world that is a mockumentary that doesn't exist. But I think as researchers, we need to think about what, how people want to be perceived and how they might be presenting themselves to us in the field versus how they actually are, and sort of our positionality within that. And we don't really see who the cameramen are or what they're like to get a sense of that in The Office. But I'm going to just I guess it's going to be a good transition to another film clip that we're going to look at, which are two nuns that are interviewing people in Chicago. So this is an example of convenience sampling. They are going to specific places and just picking who they would like to interview to ask a question, and they're doing that. And I think as you watch this, think about if they were someone else, like if they didn't have an official position as someone who's sort of associated with a larger institution that is spiritual, how people would answer them instead. So I think thinking about their positionality and the question and how people are answering the question is important. So this is also available, like the full thing is available at Cardam Quinn Films. They are a historical archive and they provide films, but I believe you have to sort of pay for them or rent them. And I'll also post other historical archives that you don't need to do that, but it's really interesting, like democracy documentary collaborative. So it's films since 1966. So I'll post a link to this resource in the video as well. But let's get into the actual. And these are little snippet clips that I got on YouTube.
I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do today. If you just want to kind of go over, what and why and what we're going to do, I'd appreciate it.
What would you feel most comfortable?
I don't know. I've not having ever done it. What do you think works best? I mean, just to walk up to someone and say, are you happy? What makes you happy? Or And then I think automatically they'll have a question of, what are you doing, or who are you, or something like that. You just feel it from there and go right on. And then work with them and then return to the question after you've explained maybe what you're doing.
Are we going to pick whoever we'd like to walk up to, or is that going to make any difference? Yes.
Just pick whoever you want.
Are we going together, or are we going one at a time?
We thought together.
Could I ask you,
So,
are you
as
happy?
you see, they're asking
Yes.
questions that are definitely questions as researchers we think through prior, like if you're doing something like this that is convenient sampling, are you going to be in a group of people, or how are you going to explain the research that you're doing? And obviously, in this particular instance, this is more documentary and it's film, and there is a director who has like his own sort of agenda in the background. And so we as researchers need to think about like positionality and like people who are actually in the field doing the research and how they're going to come across and the types of questions that we're going to ask. So this is more like a casual social experiment in this setting, but as researchers, I think it's refreshing to see the nuns' questions about these things, because I think these are very, very personal. Like every researcher sort of has these questions about these things and gets nervous about these things of like, well, aren't they going to ask me what am I doing, and like aren't they going to sort of like push back on me, and sort of the discomfort of like having to do qualitative research, I think can be really exciting and also like very scary at the same time. So I think
What makes you happy?
What makes me happy?
Like,
well, I have a family. They've all been successful. They've graduated, gone to college and everything, and they've taken their place in the world, and they're doing good. So it makes me happy.
What are some things that you think cause unhappiness?
Oh, lack of.
If you see the kids in the background, like they clearly like, I think they show what a lot of us feel internally when we're on camera is like, oh, I want to be seen, like, hello, it's me. And so I think we need to recognize that when we are doing qualitative interviews that are more like structured or more intentional, that aspect is a part of it too. And obviously they're on like the spectacle of film is a little bit more magical than talking to a particular interviewer, but I think there is an aspect of us as people that want to be seen, right? And thinking about that through our own qualitative methods is important.
And they've taken their place in the world, and they're doing good, so it makes me happy.
What are some things that you think cause unhappiness?
Oh, lack of a good home to live in, and the lack of parents, and then some people don't have any God. They have nothing to look forward to. Their life isn't full. They don't go to church, and they don't know anything. They're lost.
No, I can't say I'm too happy. I couldn't say that really.
Could you tell us why, or
what makes me happy?
Or what would make you happy?
Well, there are three big things that make a person happy or responsible for happiness: sex, social life, what's the other? And your work. And then somehow or other, we wind up being thwarted in one degree or another in one of these things. So I guess, according to the formula, that's what's responsible for my unhappiness. Little things make me happy. Sleeping late, things like that. Nothing more complicated than that.
So you see how the different settings may have influenced how people are answering. So in the first interview, they were interviewing someone like outside of a church where he just presumably went to mass, right? So his answer incorporates his faith as well. And so the second woman, who it seems like they interviewed her like right outside of a shopping center, so maybe that had some influence on how she was responding as well. So I think thinking about context and the space that people are coming in and going from, especially when you're doing convenience sampling interviewing, is important as well. And I think that has some insight for when you're doing like also snowball sampling, like how you know the person might influence like how they answer their questions, like if they are a representative of some larger organization or whatnot like that, might frame how they talk about things as well. And part of qualitative analysis is thinking through all these things and trying to like develop some truth of it, right? And so here's another interview as well of the same nuns.
We're asking this afternoon one simple question of people: are you happy?
Gosh, what a question. Well, in what context? Am I professionally happy? Am I personally happy?
Let's take.
Am I religiously happy?
Do they all go together for you, or no? No. Or sort of a state.
No, they don't go together. I think, I'm, professionally perpetually dissatisfied. I could because I want to do better. Personally, I'm happy. I'd like to have peace in Vietnam. In that sense, I'm unhappy. But I can't. How can you ask a person to throw everything into one category?
I think that's unfair.
I don't think it's an unfair question. I think it's an irrelevant question.
Well, we're trying to see what makes people happy. Now, some of those things are the things that make you unhappy, and success in one phase would make you happier.
I don't know. I don't want to quibble. I don't want to pick nits, but I think it's very difficult to, when I wake up in the morning and read a paper and, I don't know, Senator Hartke makes sense on Vietnam, then I feel the.
You feel happier, or you feel pleased?
Well,
or
all
is
right.
there a difference?
In that regard, what Hartke says is an intellectual happiness, pleasure.
Is happiness something that you're searching for in life?
No. Satisfaction, maybe I'll use that word. Happiness is a word like conformity, like togetherness. I shy away from it. I try not to.
What about happiness in the relation to other people?
Oh, again, I would use the word pleasure. I just, happiness has become such a societal word. People say happiness is a warm puppy. People say happiness is a blanket, and happiness is far too complicated a subject to bandy around. So
You keep it as something special, not trivial.
Yeah, it's very important, and consequently very hard to define.
Do you think that's why you're not seeking it?
Perhaps. I don't know. Maybe I probably haven't been any help.
So I think also just, you notice the like comfortability of people in answering questions to these two women who are seemingly like representatives of something that's like spiritual, and also just have a more nurturing demeanor about them, because usually when you think of nuns, you think of that they're nurturing, and these nuns, the way the film is sort of framing them, they're smiling and they're sort of like approachable. And so that allowed sort of the interviews to give a broad range of answers and definitions, and like what they relied on to say whether or not they were happy. Like the second woman had those three sort of categories that she defines happiness within, whereas the last man sort of like really grappling with, okay, how do we operationalize these definitions? And as researchers, we might ask broader questions to try to understand how like more quantitative researchers can operationalize definitions, or we might come in with more specific questions. So if we're asking something broad, like, are you happy? We might say like, well, this literature defines happy in this way. Do you agree with it, right? And have people engage with the literature on it more. And so this is like very much an example of like open-ended, broad questions and how positionality fits within that. So these were that's more like interviewing and convenient sampling. And you'll see, like, in media, people do this all the time. Like, newscasters will, like, ask random people who are at a particular event or situation what their feelings and things are and whatnot. So it's important to know that, like, while we can gain insight from those individuals, it's not necessarily a generalization of the larger US population because we're not probability sampling, but we can develop theory from it. And switching gears a little bit, I'm going to go into this. This is a film that was done in 1964 of Maxwell Street, which is sort of like it was like a market where people sold goods on the street every Sunday. And the film crew sort of just filmed this space, right? So this is if you were to do qualitative analysis and you just wanted to understand like a community space or a particular neighborhood or like be within the field of research when your focus of study was a particular setting. This is sort of an example for you to think about how to get at that setting. And in this particular film, they describe it as, and this is on Independent Video Archive, which is another resource I will post. But this is what they call cinema verite style. And so I just like Googled a little diagram of it. So direct cinema is when the author is like a fly on the wall, and I'll show an example of that. Observational cinema is when like the person like cuts and edits things to present a narrative, but the person isn't like the person who's filming isn't in the particular narrative. And then cinema verite when like the filmmaker participates in front of the camera or makes artistic choices, and in this case they're not participating in front of the camera but they're narrating, so they are providing a sense of framing narrative and story in their own words. And then, so I think this is important to think about when we think about the various roles of the observer, because they're sort of like an observer as participant. So to the person watching, it's known that that person is framing things and whatnot, but they're not actually participating in the space of it. We don't see them visually on camera doing that. And then I think, and I would love to hear from you all more. I think the participant as observer is more so like Nana's right. They like identify themselves as people who are just asking these questions and just sort of like presenting it in that particular way, and they participated within the group. And like sort of facilitated, right? And so direct cinema would be seen more as like the complete observer that we showed. So in direct cinema, it's just observing without becoming a participant. So direct cinema would be observing without like editing our video whatsoever. But there's still, which I think is important, like the fact that there is a camera makes things change, right? It just inherently makes people, like we saw the kids in the film, like want to show themselves or not want to show parts of themselves or want to present themselves in a particular way. And even when we as researchers don't have that baggy like film, like we don't have the particular film equipment and all of those things that show that, oh, okay, you are being observed, like there is an aspect of recognizing that people act differently when they are observed, right? And trying to understand what that acting differently might look like to analyze it in your qualitative methods is really important. And as I gave the excerpts on positionality, that's sort of like how people recognized how their particular identity might have been influencing people's actions in their spaces. And so as researchers, we don't have like the bulky equipment of camera that indicates that we're being observed, but we do have people reacting to us as individuals and our identities and whatnot. And so I think we could see that with the nuns, how people reacted to their particular identities and answering the question or not. And then I think we need to think about that as field researchers as well. Okay, so we're going to go into this. Okay. And this is called "And This Is Free." And
Always jump. In them days, it was terrific. But I mean terrific. You know, there was a world to see, and you know, it was very interesting. Of course, it's interesting today too, but not like it used to be, though.
That was no hard road. And you not only just sealed it up,
But of course, the street is finished, more or less is finished. During the week, you have nothing here. Most of these people that come down here, they work on regular jobs. They got stores somewhere else. And they're choking. They're not doing business. They come down here. They figure a lot of people gather here, and they're going to try and make a few dollars. But we don't have them during the week. During the week, there's no action here at all. And you can't live off of Sunday alone. But I'm stubborn. I'm like a lot of others. We should have quit a long time ago. There's nothing here. It's an insult to the intelligence. And money-wise, you're lucky if you can pay your nut, you know. With all the work, you know, with all your good intentions, don't mean a thing.
people from the suburb come in here to do their shopping because it's a pretty good shopping center here. Well, a lot of people like to get by with kind of cheap. If they're a good shopper, they can do pretty good, but if they are not, they can get gypped here too. If they don't know what they're doing.
Give me $2.75. Thank you. I would take for this one $2.50, you know?
No, you can't get that. This
Absolutely, that's a big one. That's a 2 yards. That's 2 yards.
This got to be 10.
What you want? You got a wash machine? Your hands are very nice too.
I can wash it.
And there's less chance, you know. Years ago, the fella didn't want to go to college. He had a little chance if he went out in business, you know, you could get somewhere. The big guys took over, you know. IBM machines, and one thing led to another, you know what I mean? I seen the whole thing happen.
John Henry said to the foreman, man ain't nothing but a man. So that spirit is laid down to the hammer. Lord, Lord, that is the John Henry was a steel dragon. John Henry said to the captain, when you go to town, bring back a 9-pound hammer. Gonna drive this down. Says, why did you take pretty little shoes, woman? Your dress so fine. Got your shoes off of Maxwell. I got the dress on the house. Dress on the house. John Henry, yeah, Dan. John Henry. Don't worry about it. Money is not a god.
So that was just a little bit of this larger movie, which is like about 48 minutes. But I'll post it. But I think it's important to show like how the filmmaker sort of provides narrative for people to understand the context and like who the people that are there are and what the space is, right? So they're not just a fly in the wall, they're giving you context of, oh, before the highway, this was a different space, but it's still sort of similar to what it was prior. And they're sort of giving you like the different groups within the space. So there's the women from the suburbs, and they sort of give you a visual of what that person looks like. And I think it's also important to recognize, like, so this is a very large venue where there are a lot of people. So the whole idea of there being a filmmaker with equipment and a large camera, it's not as intrusive, right? So thinking about your setting and your own note taking or however you're collecting data and whether or not it's intrusive or not and how noticeable it is. So in this instance, they can get a lot of good film because, and like sort of interaction and engagements that would have maybe happened regardless of whether or not there was a film crew there because of how big and large the crowd is, right? So whereas if it were a bunch of people in one room, they would be very much hyper aware of the camera. But because there are so many other things going on in the space, the film and the camera crew are like not as noticed by the people around them, so they can sort of get these smaller interactions. And so I think in thinking about you're doing your research, like if you're doing qualitative methods in the field, thinking about how you are writing notes or how you are taking data on your phone, or if you're recording and like thinking about the least intrusive thing. And like I believe in like it can be distracting to be aware of the fact that you're being watched while you're sort of going through these stages, and especially if you're doing research within a context, it's best to be less intrusive. Whereas if you're doing like structured qualitative interviews where the person comes in and sits and like knows that they're being interviewed, it's not as distracting to write notes, but it is helpful for you to audio record. That way you can develop more of a conversation and ensure that the interview moves along. So thinking about the different mediums of collecting data and like how intrusive or not intrusive they are depending on the context of your setting is really important as well. And like you can see that there's this setting in this space that is Maxwell Street, and then they're talking about like larger themes of not being able to make a living, and people trying to find bargains, and people getting ripped off, and there's sort of at the end, which we just got a little snippet, was this man who's talking about religion, and like throughout this entire film, there are a lot of different speakers, either singing or like, and they talk about college too. And so there's these like, you can look at it, but there's sort of these themes and tensions that develop from just observing this space. And that's what a lot of qualitative research is like going to a space and observing and then being able to develop theory that comes out and questions that arrive just based off of observing the space, right? And like we can conceptualize this as an intersection of market and diversity and like give it the historical context behind it while also analyzing like how these larger things come into play within the individuals themselves. Yeah, and if you want to continue watching it, there's like different blues artists and like all it's like a very much a market festival space where these things come into play. So if you're a qualitative researcher, you can start sort of analyzing themes in religion and the type of music genres that people are using and how people engage or interact or receive different people in the space as well. So qualitative research allows for a lot of underscoring of like mechanisms. Like a lot of times we talk about causal inference and like how this caused this, but qualitative research allows us to look at like what exactly are the mechanisms and dynamics at play between those interactions that get to that causal space, which is really exciting. Okay, and then this is also another example of a context-specific observation. So we're looking at Halsted Street, which is a street in Chicago. Apologies, I'm from Chicago, and a lot of this is coming from my film studies class that I took. So they're following a particular street in Chicago that sort of goes through the heart of it and was really big for trade and making sure that goods were distributed across Chicago. And like it was less well known than like Michigan Avenue or State Street. So I'll just show this briefly because I think a lot of the things of being in a setting and observing rather than being with a particular group are similar.
John, como Marcos el guerrillero, I've been wanting to retouch this mirror because it's almost fading, and before it fades completely, I want to bring it up and make it alive. So it was done in 1982. I've been able to see the best and the worst of this community, and I want to paint both of them. I want to paint the night, the way the night looks in this neighborhood. It looks very dramatic, especially with this type of street lighting. You feel like you're in some type of cop movie, you know. Everybody is a suspect. A lot of drugs, a lot of stuff, you know. But at the same time, there's a lot of beautiful families. People who want to work and want to get ahead, and people who love flowers and color, you know. Which is the day to me, you know. I want to paint day and night in the heart of the community.
We have a lot of new family members who became citizens. In fact, my mom just became a United States citizen. So we had the biggest 4th of July party to celebrate her citizenship. Our neighborhood has been completely gang infested for some time, and the gang activity is pretty bad. And I think this is why we want to have the block party, just to make it safe for the children. And I'm hoping that eventually our neighborhood could be a safe neighborhood for everyone.
So I think I picked that particular snippet because I think it was interesting the dialogue that the muralist was talking about. So he's trying to portray the neighborhood in this mural, which we can think about also the narrative that we develop in qualitative methods as a form of like artistic representation, but it also needs to have like rigor behind it as well. And so we need to make sure that it's grounded in what your research participants and objects are actually saying, and there's sort of this push and pull between like being an objective versus participatory researcher. So this man is from the community. He recognizes different positive and negative aspects of his community. So if you're more in the space of being a participant researcher, where you're actually identified with a particular group that you're researching or within the particular setting that you're researching, then it's important to make sure that you are sort of presenting the dynamic aspects of both the positive and negative, and maybe getting outside of that duality to show how the positive and the negative interact and really get at sort of the systems and larger things. So even if your unit of analysis is a setting or a group of people, like there are larger historical narratives that have set that up. So it's really important when you're doing qualitative methods to sort of present the context of the individual observations that you're looking at. So they're often used as data for larger themes, right? And I think it's interesting, like this is just a film about Halstead Street, but we see sort of this crime narrative present itself again. And I think as researchers, like crime intersects so much with different types of social issues. So I think doing qualitative research in criminal justice is exciting, and you can find it in spaces that are not necessarily expected, right? Okay, and my final okay, so this last video is a good show of observations and how they can sort of be like the film itself presents itself as like a fly on the wall. So the person is just observing and not providing any narration of what's going on in the film. The film is speaking for itself, right? But while to us it looks like the observer is the fly on the wall, we do need to think about the fact that the person who's there is very much in Chicago style filmmaking. It's pretty common for the film person to sort of be very close to the people who are speaking, and although they're like a fly on the wall, they feel as if the person is there physically. And so I also thought this was an interesting film. It's called American Revolution 2, and it's about a coalition between the Young Patriots and the Black Panthers. And here they're at a community meeting, and they're sort of talking about police harassment. And you see that this is a topic that has continued. So I think that historical archives, which are a whole another, like besides film, historical archives are important to think about, because a lot of the topics that we talk about in criminal justice are recurring debates that have happened for a pretty long time. So I'm going to show a little snippet of this film. Sorry.
Patriots. To me, that has a connotation of meaning patriotic, and I like those words. They're kind of unique these days. Now, there's nobody in this room that knows anything about being poor any more than I do, or anything more about your plight than I do. I ask you to keep your questions constructive. I ask you to keep the meeting orderly, and I assure you that something will come out of it.
A week ago today, 6 young men, along with myself, were walking down Broadway Street. We just left a meeting at Junebug's house. We were detained for 2 hours, I would say. 6 or 7 fellows walking down the street. So I'd like you to maybe define, like, is 6 guys on the street considered a gang, or at this time of night?
will concede that police officers generally are a little prejudicial in regard to any citizen who perhaps doesn't dress or look like the way they think people should look. Now, I certainly appreciate your plight being a Negro, but it would be silly for me to stand here tonight and make excuses for my men or try to make you feel a little better by saying my men were wrong. It would be wrong both ways. We have to know some of the background. There may have been a robbery there an hour before, 15 minutes before. There may have been a crime wave before. There may have been burglaries. There may have been jackrolling, so many things. We're trying to better things. We're trying to bring out in the police officer, we're trying to teach him that everybody isn't like him. Sometimes things happen that I don't know about, but I will make it my business to know about them, if you will bring it to my attention.
At the Red Squad, every meeting that's been held in Thresholds Hall has been observed by the Red Squad and photographed because I've watched it. I want to know what the purpose of this is.
The Red Squad? They take your pictures just as these people are taking my picture here.
No, it's not quite that open.
Well, apparently it was. You saw it and other people have seen it. There are those units within the police department or any law enforcement unit that have as their function the investigating and looking into.
My internet is sort of bugging out, but I think this one is an interesting setting for qualitative research that lots of people have done research on. So there are like often community meetings with police officers, and that's a common sort of qualitative analysis. I remember when I was an undergrad, I had to go to a community police officer meeting, and it's CAPS in Chicago. And so I think this is interesting because it's sort of the same conversations that we are having now, but it's like a very different historical context. And I think also, as you see in the film, it's like the people who are the camera persons are very much close to whoever is speaking. And so it gives you a sentiment like you're physically there. And I think there's a way to do that in qualitative research where you can provide settings descriptively in your writing to give the idea and feeling of someone actually physically being there. So I hope this sort of demonstration was helpful for you to sort of think through how positionality works, how there are different spaces of qualitative analysis. So it could be a in-person meeting, or it could be a setting or a marketplace, and like whether or not you're going into the space with questions already, or a lot of the times when we're doing field research, the questions come up as we do them, right? And so I think that thinking about how people change their perspectives when they're being observed is really important, and how they may be presenting themselves in a particular way and trying to identify that and write about how that might influence your data is important as well. So I'll post this if you guys have any other questions. I'll probably post this in the discussion board so we can present more of a conversation on it, or maybe not. Let's see.